Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, is a man with an insatiable sexual appetite. For years, he went after vulnerable women who he would rape and murder, later coming back to their rotting corpses because he was sexually unsatisfied. And with that, I'm Cassie.
I'm Sara. Now let's talk about the Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, was born February 18, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah. He grew up in what became SeaTac, Washington, and his father was a bus driver and his mother was a sales clerk. Gary claimed that when he was younger, his mother engaged in inappropriate behavior. For example, he alleged that after wetting the bed, a habit that persisted into his early teens, she would wash his genitals. He would later tell defense psychologists that, as an adolescent, he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction towards his mother and fantasized about killing her.
So Gary is upset with his mother because he says that she was engaging in inappropriate behavior and that after he would wash the bed, after he would wet the bed, she would wash him. Which, like, as a child, I feel like that's a normal thing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, obviously into his teen years.
Yeah, so, like, as a child, I could understand, like, you wet the bed, you're gonna be all gross with pee.
Yeah, your mom's gonna want to clean you.
But I can understand him getting angry with her doing it into his
But was
teens.
he still doing that into his teen years, or was he still wetting the bed into his teen years?
I think both.
I don't. Yeah,
I think it's both, because, like, she would continuously, like, wash him.
Yeah.
So it's probably, like, the psychological thing that's, like, happening that's, like...
Yeah. Well, and for him, I mean, he's a teenager, too. Like, with his conflicting feelings of anger and attraction to his mom. Like, he's a young teenage boy. He's probably only surrounded by his mother. And his mother is touching him.
Yeah,
You know, whether or not what she's doing there is meant to be inappropriate or not.
I don't think it is. I think it's her just trying to teach him a lesson. Like, if you wet the bed, this is what's going to happen. But she did it so often that, like, some psychological trigger is happening. And
because
it's
his body's reacting to something that he shouldn't be, which probably is confusing him.
When he was 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy who survived the attack. He had led the boy into the woods and then stabbed him through the ribs into his liver. Gary graduated from high school in 1969 and married his 19-year-old high school girlfriend, Claudia Craig. He joined the United States Navy and was sent to Vietnam, where he served on board a supply ship and saw combat. During his time in the military, he had frequent sexual intercourse with sex workers and contracted gonorrhea. Although angered by this, he continued this activity without protection. The marriage ended within a year. When friends and family were questioned about Gary after his arrest, they described him as friendly but strange. His first 2 marriages resulted in divorce because of infidelity by both partners. He became religious during his second marriage, evangelizing door to door, reading the Bible aloud at work and at home, and insisting that his wife follow the strict teachings of their pastor. Despite his beliefs, Gary continued to solicit the services of sex workers and wanted his wife to participate in sex in public and inappropriate places, sometimes even in areas where his victims' bodies were later discovered. According to women in his life, he had an insatiable sexual appetite. His 3 ex-wives and several ex-girlfriends reported that he demanded sex from them several times a day. Often, he would want to have sex in public areas or in the woods. In his second marriage, Gary became very religious and was reading the Bible. But why do you think he wanted his wife to follow the rules if he wasn't really following them? Maybe he thought he was, but
I don't
following
know.
them.
I feel like it's kind of weird because he wanted his wife to, like, follow the strict teachings of their pastor, but he didn't want to, and I don't know if it's because, like
he was insatiable, or
that, or like he was taking the teachings wrong, because, like, in the Bible, like, women are very, like, obey, like, what your husband says, like, because it's old time and stuff, you know, so generally, like, you know, women submit or whatever, you know, so maybe he thought, oh, I'm a man, like, I can kind of
tell her what to do,
do what I want, you know what I mean, like, I don't know if he would think that way, but maybe that was his thought, or he just couldn't get past his
appetite,
his need, so he wanted his wife to follow it, and maybe that was the only thing in his life he could control. You know, like, he can control her to do that, but he couldn't control his own need. I don't know. I just think it's weird. Like, why?
I mean, I feel like right now that would make the most sense. Like,
yeah. That's all I can really think of. But I also think it's weird that he would tell her to follow these strict rules, but then try to get her to have sex in public.
Yeah. Like, dude.
Like if you're a really, really strict Christian, you're like really, really, really religious, like sex is like very taboo. Like you don't, you know what I mean? So like for him to be like, you need to follow these strict rules, but let's go have sex in a park with a bunch of people around. You know what I mean? Like
near the bodies, I bet.
Yeah, I don't know.
In 1980, Gary was arrested for allegedly choking a prostitute, but no charges were filed after he claimed that the woman had bit him. 2 years later, he was arrested for solicitation. He was believed to have begun his killing spree shortly thereafter. His first victim was thought to have been a 16-year-old girl who went missing after leaving her foster home in July 1982, and her body was found a week later in the Green River. Over the next 2 years, he raped and killed more than 40 women, many of whom were prostitutes or runaways. A number of Gary's early victims were later found in or near the river, giving rise to the nickname Green River Killer. Other bodies were discovered in remote wooded areas. After 1984, he committed several more murders, the last occurring in 1998. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Gary is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington.
In the 10-year span that Gary is murdering people, he murdered around 71 people. How do you think that kind of made him feel?
I bet that made him, I don't want to say like on top of the world, like being able to get away with like killing 71 girls and women over 10 years. That's 7 women a year.
That's a lot.
Maybe he would feel good because he's like...
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like he might feel like he's almost invincible.
Yeah, I wanted to say invincible, but I was like, is that the right word? I mean, if I put myself in his shoes and I killed 71 people, I'd be like, God damn, I'm hot shit. I got away 10
Especially
years.
Over 10 year span, like it wasn't like a really short, you know what I mean?
I was like, I could probably go another 10 years and kill another 71 people.
That was my other thought, that maybe like he might feel like he's on top of the world, but he also might feel like he's not satisfied.
Oh, no.
You know what I mean? Because it was saying that his sexual appetite is so crazy, you know, and the fact that he's getting away with all this, he might be like, man, I just need to
up it more.
Yeah, like it's not enough. I definitely feel like he would think he's one of the best. It'd probably just fuel his ego.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, I can get any girl I want, and then
like the police,
do whatever I want.
Like, the police can't get me. Like...
Yeah. Crazy.
In court statements, he later reported that he killed so many that he lost count. The victims were believed to be either sex workers or runaways whom he picked up along the Pacific Highway South. Gary sometimes showed the women a picture of his son to trick them into trusting him. They would then engage in sexual activity, and after minutes of intercourse from behind, he would wrap his forearm around the front of their necks and use the other arm to pull back as tightly as he could, strangling them. He killed most victims in his home, his truck, or a secluded area. Most of their bodies were dumped in wooded areas around the Green River, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and other dump sites within South King County. There were also 2 confirmed and another 2 suspected victims found in the Portland, Oregon area. The bodies were often left in clusters, sometimes posed, usually nude. He would sometimes return to the victims' bodies and have sexual intercourse with them. Gary later explained that he did not find necrophilia more sexually satisfying, but having sex with the deceased reduced his need to obtain a living victim and thus limited his exposure to being caught. Because most of the bodies were not discovered until only the skeletons remained, 2 victims are still unidentified. He occasionally contaminated the dump sites with gum, cigarettes, and written materials belonging to others, and he even transported a few victims' remains across state lines into Oregon to confuse the police. So it mentioned Gary has a dump site for all of his bodies. It's basically near the Green River. But why do you think he would contaminate the dump site?
I mean, I guess it depends on what the dump site looks like. Maybe he thought if he like contaminates it with like these random things, people just think like young kids are just coming there to
party or whatever.
I
picture, you know, the river in the background, and you have like the woods, and then it's just kind of like bare, like the circle.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking too.
Like, and then it's just like, you know, the unmarked graves.
Yeah, like. So maybe that's what he thought he was accomplishing by that, but I feel like, wouldn't that just bring more attention?
I think so. Like maybe like
Unless it was like bare there, and he thought, oh well, people are gonna question why there's just all this land that has nothing, no grass.
I know. I mean, what I'm thinking is, so, you know, he goes, digs up a grave, puts them down, buries them, and then maybe takes like a break, you know, like cigarette break, maybe some gum, he's anxious or something. But then, or like when he's doing his, you know, necrophilia.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just...
Maybe, but then he's leaving his DNA there. So, I don't know.
Maybe because he doesn't think anybody...
will come find it?
Find it. So it's like, it's very like difficult to understand why he would just leave stuff there. And and it said written materials belonging to others. So is it just like the personal belongings that were like on
people? Yeah, maybe
people,
different body. Yeah,
and he was just kind of like going through their stuff.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. He's a weird guy. I don't really know.
I don't know either. In the early 1980s, the King County Sheriff's Office formed the Green River Task Force to investigate the murders. Task Force members included Robert Capel and David Raychert, who periodically interviewed incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy in 1984. Bundy offered his opinions on the psychology, motivations, and behavior of the killer. He suggested that the killer was revisiting the dump sites to have sex with his victims, which turned out to be true, and if police found a fresh grave, they should stake it out and wait for him to come back. Also contributing to the investigation was FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas, who developed a profile of the suspect. In 1987, law enforcement officials obtained a search warrant for Gary's home and work. However, none of the items, including carpet fibers and ropes, could be linked to the victims. They also obtained a DNA sample from him, but the technology back in the 80s was unable to match it with semen recovered from the bodies. However, following the advent of more sophisticated tests, a match was made in 2001, and Gary was arrested later that year.
I find it very interesting that Ted Bundy is the one that they went to kind of for help. To kind of get into the mind of Gary Ridgway. I kind of like it though.
I think it's like the most genius thing they could have done, like asking a serial killer to help them catch a serial killer.
Especially if he was like willing. If Ted Bundy was like, yeah.
I mean, what else does he have going on?
That's true.
He needs something to pass the time.
True. But like, I wonder how Ted Bundy would have felt though. Imagine like being in prison and they're like, oh, the FBI want you to help them solve another serial killer case. His ego inflated. Yeah. But
I also could be like, well, what do I get out of it?
That's true. I don't know if he got anything out of it, but so I think it was a great idea because obviously with what was just read, he knew exactly what he was going to do, you know, and he gave him the best advice possible, which was really just to go and wait it out.
Although Gary initially proclaimed his innocence, he soon confessed to the crimes, stating that he wanted to kill as many prostitutes as possible. He targeted sex workers because he thought they may not be reported missing and because he hated most of them. In 2003, he accepted a plea deal in which he was sentenced to 48 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In addition, he agreed to reveal the location of undiscovered bodies. Many speculated that he was responsible for more deaths, and in 2013, Gary said that he had murdered upwards of 80 women. So, going off how he said he hated prostitutes the most, I read somewhere that he hates prostitutes and like other sex workers because when he was younger, he would always hear his parents argue about sex workers. I think maybe because his dad was a bus driver, I think his dad would see them, you know, like all on like the side of the road and just hate looking at them. But like, like it's weird.
Like it's interesting because like in my mind, his dad must have been like
looking
or like getting together with sex workers because like I understand like not agreeing like with what they're doing, but to go home and then argue with your wife about it. Unless his mom was like kind of a sex worker or...
I don't know. Something in the back of my mind tells me she was a little promiscuous.
Yeah. I mean, she was being weird with her child, so it's possible.
So maybe, like, I don't know, maybe she wasn't like arguing back with him, like maybe just agreeing like loud, just like, you know, they're whatever.
I don't know. In my mind, I just feel like his dad was getting together with sex workers.
Yeah,
and
I feel like that could be like a possible.
You know, and then he didn't like them because, whatever, the attention that it took his dad away from his mom. Whatever, I don't know.
So if you liked watching this video about Gary Ridgway, make sure you go check out our other video about another serial killer, Ted Bundy, which will be right here. So go check it out, please.
We will see you guys next week. Peace.